Hey folks, my name is Dustin Siggins, and I'm here with Blair, Jeremy, and Scott. And we're going to be talking about what's kind of dominated much of the LinkedIn conversation for public relations professionals today, which is Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, being included as number 17 on the PR Week power list for the top 50 influencers and power players in the public relations industry. Blair is the one who actually made me aware of this on her post that got, what, 130 or 140 comments, kind of went viral unto itself. And in the course of this conversation, became clear there's a lot of people on both sides of her inclusion, but also supporting her inclusion doesn't necessarily mean you think that she is an ethical or an outstanding PR practitioner on ethics and counsel and other things. So I'm going to start with kind of laying out why PR Week included her. I got an email from Steve, the publisher of PR Week, and what he said was that first they're going to cover reactions to it in their podcast next week, so be sure to look for that. Second, quote, this is a power list, not a morality list or an ethics list. And it's fine if everyone disagrees with us as long as the discussions are conducted in a civil manner. I'm sure that many people disagree with Time Magazine naming individuals including Donald Trump, Elon Musk, J.D. Vance, RFK Jr., and Mark Zuckerberg to the People of the Year list. That doesn't mean Time agrees with them or their views or actions, but it does mean those people are powerful and influential. And then the last thing I'll read here is that in PR Week, what they wrote on their website and in the magazine was, Leavitt probably holds the most high-profile communications role in the world, and as such, she wields significant power at constructing the narrative of Donald Trump's second term as president. She's on the list because she is, quote, without a doubt, powerful and influential. Now, Blair, you're unfortunately the lone person on the panel who thinks that she shouldn't have been on the list. I'd like your response to especially to the fact that she's on the list because she is, quote, without doubt, powerful and influential. Take it away.
Yeah, so I mean, my response to that is that really she doesn't have any power, right? It's the position that holds the power. So, for example, Sean Spicer doesn't have any power today. He's not included in the list. Neither is Karine Jean-Pierre, who I believe made the list last year, Biden's former press secretary. So, to me, it's not her that has the power. If she was no longer his press secretary, I don't think she could walk into the same rooms in DC. But what I thought was really interesting, and this post came from, I saw the inclusion in a post on Instagram, and I was shocked at how quickly the comments on that post, one, went off the rails, tons and tons of comments. Two, that the majority of the comments were things like, girl, it's not too late to delete this, and like canceling my subscription. And I thought that, my original post was the importance of monitoring social media comments as a part of your active PR strategy and how quickly a single post could send things off the rails. I mean, I would be interested to see the loss of subscriber rates for PR Week as a result of that post, or like maybe on that day. And just whether or not you agree that she should be on the list. That, sentiment on social media posts can absolutely make or break a brand in a single post. And it's a big part of a PR strategy. That said, like I said, I believe Jean-Pierre made the list last year. And so it's possible that PR Week puts every press secretary on the list, as a part of that. But this is different to me, because we're looking at a regime that a lot of the things that she's saying could be harmful to Americans, harmful to the American way, really, really untruthful. Um, this is, a regime that has said maybe we're thinking about changing elections and not leaving, right? So to me, this is really different. And so for PR Week, to me, to elevate that is in and of itself really, really harmful. And that becomes a disgrace to our profession, because to me, our profession in particular holds a higher threshold for maintaining integrity. And this puts that in jeopardy.
Jeremy, over to you.
Yeah, I think they're all super legitimate points. And I think they're points shared by a lot of people. Where I kind of come down on this is kind of acknowledging the world that we live in, whether or not that's the world that we wish we live in, right? And so the kind of genesis of my analysis here is like, if the list and the standards for being on the list is that you wield sort of either direct or inherent or any other type of influence, impact, and power presently, I think it bodes well for one's inclusion, even if we don't like the tactics. And what I would say is, again, you pointed out, I'm pretty clear online where my politics lie, although I have, clients that are very bipartisan organizations that represent, clients like trade associations and startups that are not really political organizations in any way. I myself identify as a Democrat. I've posted a lot publicly, and surely anyone who knows me in my personal world knows that and Dustin, you're among those people, that I have significant disdain for Donald Trump, his politics, his style, his record for obfuscation, for spreading misinformation, and that goes along with many, although not all, of the people that have worked for him, right? But that being said, if PR Week, if Time Magazine, if Fortune is doing a list that's based on current influence and power, I think it's very difficult to not include the White House press secretary. I would say sort of finally here that I do think there's a continuum, right? I think many press secretaries, whether they work for Republican administrations, I know Kayleigh McEnerney, who was, subjected to a lot of criticism, the Biden's press secretary, Corinne Jean-Pierre as well. I mean, I recall even it gave me a chuckle. She said that President Biden could, sprint laps around all the White House staff. I mean, I think no matter what our politics, that was probably at best an exaggeration. So where I kind of come down on this is like, does the person currently, whether the power may be transferred by somebody else, that could mean a lot of people. You could be the head spokesman or woman for a major tech company. And if you're not in that role, sort of, after a period of time, your influence and power wanes, right? So I would say one other thing is that taking away Karoline Leavitt's inclusion here, I think, not naming names, because some of these people are friends and acquaintances, there are other individuals, on this list who represent industries, who represent corporations, who represent other institutions that, to put it diplomatically, may not have the most pure record for consistent ethics, truth-telling, non-adherence to scorched earth tactics. And so I think it becomes very difficult if you're thinking about power, impact, and influence to sort of like, where do you draw the line for inclusion if you want to bring in what I think Blair and what many of us have is concerns about what we hope that our industry is in terms of ethics, morals, values, virtuousness. But we know that, they occupy sort of an extreme, from the most honest brokers, of course, everyone on this call, to people that, let's say, are less than honest. So that's how I would respond.
So you don't have any strong opinions on the matter at all? You haven't thought about it? Okay. Scott, over to you.
I don't have quite as much to say about it, because to me, it's a lot more black and white and logic based. There's a list called the top 50 most powerful people, or power list. And that really doesn't equate to most trusted or most ethical or most talented. It's just about power. So I don't care who's in the White House, right? Like, this is a completely nonpartisan perspective. Mine is just purely based on, what does this list exist for? Okay, it's to recognize the people who wield the most power in the communications industry or in PR. All right, she's not a PR person. She's a communicator, though. That's for sure. So, we could debate whether she should be on a PR power list, but the fact is, if you are incorporating, communicators in general into that list, there's no question that the White House press secretary belongs on that list. It just seems so obvious and plain as day to me. And that goes for, Biden's press secretary, Trump's press secretary, whoever comes next. That's the most powerful office in the world. It's the most powerful leader in the world. Their press secretary is the one in front of the media. They belong on the list.
Now, my position is that this is no different than Time Magazine almost naming Osama bin Laden Person of the Year, Man of the Year in 2001. They named Rudy Giuliani instead, but they seriously considered naming Osama bin Laden. They named Adolf Hitler in 1938, and ironically, Joseph Stalin in 1939 and 1942 for peace-related reasons. Again, ironically. So I don't think Time Magazine should ever, and I thought this before I got Steve's email, this is not an ethics list. This is a who made an impact in the world. Osama bin Laden certainly did, right? Regardless of whether you support his actions or not, support what happened on 9/11 or not, he had an impact. And I think it's similar here. To your point, Blair, Josh Earnest, one of President Obama's press secretaries, made the list this year. He is 23rd on the list. He is with United Airlines. And Jay Carney, who was, when I covered DC as a reporter, he was well known for saying things like, we'll get back to you, instead of giving real answers. And in fact, Yahoo News had a whole clip of him just doing that several dozen times. He is he's global head of communications for Airbnb. So I don't know how much of the transfer of power, your example of Sean Spicer stands out, of course, but even Sarah Huckabee Sanders is now governor of an entire state. So I do think there is inherent power. Yes, it's transferred from the president, but there is power and influence in the role that anyone has as press secretary. So, Blair, how do you, to the transfer of power point, anyone in that role is inherently going to have power. Where do you draw the line in terms of the power they hold via the transfer versus themselves? Or is it just the fact that you think Karoline Leavitt represents bad, is bad, and therefore shouldn't be on for reasons more of ethics than anything else?
Yeah, I mean, so honestly, I think this year is different, right? Karoline Leavitt is different than Sean Spicer. Right. I mean, they were saying different things. And so for me, this is a really, really different ball game, really, really different rodeo. And I'd be interested, I almost wonder, like, would we be all talking about this if she hadn't made the list? Right. And so, like, what would we be going, hey, the press secretary of the United States didn't make the PR Week Power 50. And what does that mean? Like, that would have been a decision that to me would have been worth talking about anyway, had the sort of opposite happened, right? Because that is a stance from PR Week. But I also think it depends on the person. Like, I don't think Airbnb hired him just because he, was once the press secretary. I think he was qualified and probably fit in with the team and had a great vision and, had a plan for how he wanted to run comms for Airbnb, that they all went, yeah, okay, this is the right person. If again, sorry, Sean Spicer walked into that interview, whether or not he was the press secretary, it would be whether or not he's the best fit. So, I think organizations also take a look at these things differently than I would say maybe institutions like a PR Week. So I honestly, I think it would just depend. I think it depends on the person and the vibe and what they bring to the table. I don't see Karoline as a great communicator. And so, outside of this, I wouldn't want her on my team. But Karine Jean-Pierre, not perfect by any means, and probably, got a lot of criticism thrown at her, but clearly a great communicator. And so, whatever I honestly have not been following what her career is doing, but like whatever, if I was the head of a company, I would want her on my comms team, regardless of politics. So, I think that that PR Week had the opportunity to make a choice and take a stand one way or another, and they chose. And I think it would have been just as interesting of a discussion had they chose the opposite and said, hey, look, this is a year where we're not going to put the press secretary on this list. And that means something because of what it means to hold that position.
And by the way, for anyone watching, feel free to engage in the comments. We definitely want your involvement here. Just keep it respectful, please. Jeremy and Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, my perspective is this. We're talking a lot about ethics. We're talking a lot about, likability or, ability. She's in the role. She's got the position. Now, whether or not Airbnb or some other company ever hires her in the future, that's beside the point. And I would argue that Airbnb is hiring people that are connected in Washington for a reason. So I don't think I personally don't think that I forget his name would have been hired by Airbnb if he didn't have that
Jake Harney.
background. Yes, if he didn't have the background and the connections in politics, because Airbnb has a lot to win and a lot to lose when it comes to lobbying. So, but yeah,
Hey, Jeremy, you're on mute.
Yeah, he was previously, I mean, he was a journalist, Time Magazine. Interestingly, he also, worked on the Hill. He worked as head of Amazon's office, their entire communications and political operation as well, in DC. I think the bigger point, though, I think that so much of our frame of reference in this day and age is from a political and ideological frame. And we can talk probably for hours about why that is. I mean, you can say it was, this all started, there's been books written about this. It started in 2010 with the Tea Party, where politics became, far more scorched earth. Many others said that this started at the beginning of the Republic, in terms of like, pamphlets about different politicians' personal lives back to the time of,
Right.
Beating
each other with your walking canes.
Yeah, and like Hamilton, versus Burr, and go on and on, right? But I do think that in the era of Trump, it has become, politics is more tribal, right? And even things like inclusion in ranking lists can take on a political frame, both from the left and from the right. We've seen this, on some of the backlash, Dustin, that you and I have talked about on concepts like CSR and DEI and sort of what they were initially meant for and what they're sort of framed as now. And I kind of echo what Scott's saying, is that I think, and I saw this on the comments on my post, is that there was definitely people jumping in that saying, these were just, unhinged liberals who might disagree with her inclusion. And that where were these same individuals when past secretaries or past spokespeople for fill in the blank company, right? Some people mentioned tech companies. Some people mentioned oil companies. Some people mentioned, whatever it may be, an industry that they sort of have ethical kind of concerns about, right? And I think that's a fair point. I do think if, everything is hard to separate from politics these days, but I think particularly since Trump's election in 2016, what seemed abnormal is less abnormal, than it ever has been, right? And so I think even someone like me who's fairly partisan, I have a hard time, I think that there may have been a lot of pushback to PR Week and a lot of explaining for them to do if Karoline Leavitt was not included, given that they typically include the press secretary and they include other, if it's not a controversial individual, definitely head of communications and head of PR for companies that, have settled multi-billion-dollar lawsuits for, a lot of things that people would consider, immoral, unethical, misleading, right? So I think that's kind of where I come out here. I think, I do not believe that Karoline Leavitt, is someone that I would pick as a role model. She's certainly not someone that I would pick, as an embodiment of what is right about the communications industry. But then again, I've served as a spokesperson for politicians. The job is to represent your boss, in the light most favorable to him or her. And that often, requires making various types of sacrifices of your time, of your, reputation at times. And I think, as you said, Scott, she took the position, she's in the position, and, while she's paid for, whether we like it or not, on our taxpayer dime, I think it would probably be unfair to not include her. And then if you said we're not including her because she's taken, misinformation, or she's taken the sort of lack of decorum, which we've seen when she says to certain reporters that they asked a stupid question, right? I think there would be a lot of defense here, because then folks could say, well, what about when this press secretary or this spokesman for this company said such and such, right? And I think that's kind of the challenge that PR Week is facing. Although I do think it may behoove them, to think about other lists of individuals where they are going to have as a criteria, perhaps adherence to an ethical code of conduct, which, PRSA and other sort of industry platforms have put in place that we're all supposed to be following. But I do think that that's different than what power someone wields presently.
Yeah, I think if PR Week were to publish a top 50 best communicators, top 50 most admired people in power.
Sure.
All right, I don't think she makes the list, right? I think we can all agree that she doesn't make the list. But this is about power, period. And Dustin, you and I had an offline conversation about this, where I kind of just said, this is there's no emotion involved here. It's not about emotion. Emotion doesn't have a role in a discussion about power. It just doesn't. And that holds true for Time Magazine's lists that we've also cited here. Power is power. I mean, it's undeniably powerful to be the mouthpiece for the president of the United States. That's power automatically. So, like her or not, she's got the power to belong on the list.
Yeah, one of the conversations, Blair and Jeremy, you've referenced this, but it was also Blair, a lot of the comments was they're bending the knee. They're just trying to suck up to the administration. She was number 17 on the list. I don't think President Trump generally cares about anything lower than the number 1 without another digit after it, if he's going to be sucked up to, personally. So I don't think that was what they were going for. I do think that they were trying to step back away from whatever politics they hold and be objective. But the conversation that has been generated really does dive into, Perry Hedrick had a post about this where he said, and I don't have it quoted, but saying that, a drug dealer is an admired pharmacist or someone involved in the drug industry. It is what's going on here. And I would like to kind of dive into a conversation where we look at what does it mean to be ethical in PR? Because that's a big part of the conversation here is ethics, right? Blair, you've said that you think this is a different gear. I remember covering, again, I was a reporter almost exclusively during the Obama years, when I used to look at the transcript of the White House press briefings. And what I noticed, for example, Josh Earnest had a conversation with Jake Tapper on CNN, and he was held accountable because he, as a representative of the White House in that interview, was assuming that what Planned Parenthood said was correct about a controversy on alleged violations of the law and violations of ethics that they were allegedly doing. Well, so here's the question. Is it because she represents someone that we don't, as people in the industry don't like, i.e. the White House, or if you're more conservative, Planned Parenthood, or the Obama White House, or the Biden White House? Or is it the way she handles the job? Is it because she's representing that administration, the organization, whether it be Planned Parenthood or oil company, to go back around to Jeremy's point, or is it the way she handles the job? And I think a lot of the critics would say both. They would say because she represents Trump at all, therefore she's automatically part of the problem, and therefore should not be included because there needs to be this institutional, arms linked opposition to anything in this administration.
Yeah, I mean, I see that because of the way this administration comes up against the Constitution, frankly. And so that's, everything our country stands for. And so like I said before, and Jeremy, to your point, I think this is a different year, and I would love to be a fly on the wall if the reverse had happened and they're, having to defend not putting the press secretary on the list, because I think that they could make some really wonderful statements. Again, no other president, even in his first term, didn't come up against the Constitution the way he is now. And so I think when you're the mouthpiece for something like that, that becomes really problematic. It becomes, I don't think that, Jeremy, like you said, at PRSA, I signed the ethics when I joined there. And again, the way that she does the job, she's incredibly young. She comes off as incredibly young, and a lot of times just almost not, put together. And so because of the way that she comes off a lot of the time, she's not someone I would choose to represent my org or my brand or my institution or my White House, if it ever comes that way. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge. My comments section was really interesting. I had really strong opinions either on either side, when really my post was just about how a brand could lose a lot on a single post based on a decision like this, right? And that so that every decision matters. And I would be interested. I don't believe the publisher said anything, not that they would, about whether or not they saw a significant drop off of subscriptions as a result. That I would find interesting. But it's certainly gotten them a lot of buzz, at least in the LinkedIn community, for what it's worth.
Well, so here's a question on that, and I'll pivot to you, Jeremy. You're the crisis guy. Sometimes brands take risks with their audience because they think it's the right thing to do. And sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're admired for that and sometimes they're not. In this case, I suspect PR Week could lose some subscribers because they're in a concentrated world. It's not like this is, American Eagle, which is everyone wears jeans. And so I do think they could lose some subscribers, and I wonder if that should be admired in a way because they knew that was a risk, or do they get condemned from a crisis perspective for enjoining themselves to this, what they knew was going to come down the pike?
Yeah, I think that's always it's always a risk. I mean, what I talk to clients about, and I don't think it's the case here, is like when you're going to weigh in on sort of socially fraught, politically fraught issues, is like sort of one, what's your rationale for doing so, right? Like, is this aligned, either directly or secondarily, to your sort of core mission? Like, I think we saw this, we've seen this kind of play out. I mean, I was working for a very large Fortune 10 company during the George Floyd, period, right? And I think, you saw a lot of well-intentioned organizations kind of weighing in. They might, had given some sort of financial contribution to a civil rights organization, but it was really far afield. And most of these companies that weigh in, beyond saying, oh, this was a terrible tragedy, we're going to give, such and such money to this cause, like there was no sustainability to it. It was like a one-off, right? I think it gets a little harder when, the job of PR Week is to report. It is at its essence a journalistic platform, right? It is not PRSA, right? It is not sort of a governing body or sort of a standards setting organization. At its core, it's a reporting organization for the industry of PR. And what a lot of those types of organizations do is, report, rank people, companies, campaigns, whatever they may be, as part of their remit, right? And so it's possible that they lose, subscribers, or maybe advertisers. I mean, it's a subscription-based product, so they probably care less about that. But to me, I think it's a lot more defensible for them, because I think if you start making kind of values-based judgments in a role of a journalistic platform, it can become very complex. And then every decision that you may make in the future, whether it's on a rank or covering a campaign, is going to be sort of subject to this type of analysis, or perhaps analysis paralysis, right? So I suspect, and I could be wrong, I'm wrong all the time, that they are not going to probably experience a huge loss in readership, because I think most readers come to this platform. Most subscribers are coming to get information about the industry, which RFPs are out there, what tactics for media pitching, which technology platforms are the most helpful, which industries are adopting which parts of AI, right? I'm saying, like, it's more of like where you get your news. And I know that, we obviously have a very tribal and very splintered media, where a lot of people only want to read, you think of tier one media, like broadcast media, cable news, right? Like a lot of it has been separated into sort of politically themed camps, right? Do I love all the coverage of certain issues by the New York Times over the last couple of years? No. Do I love it from the Wall Street Journal? No. But I read most of these Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and I take each article sort of in its own credibility, right? So I think, like, particularly for trade publications, I do think that most likely people have a specific reason, and they're not coming there to sort of necessarily be validated on their own beliefs. That's my take. So I don't think most likely they're going to have any long-term sort of financial repercussions from this particular list.
I think it's interesting that that PR Week actually published a contextual article that explained why they included Leavitt on the list, and they anticipated some blowback, and they knew what was coming, right? Because of the world we live in right now, it's the red team and the blue team, and if you say anything nice about the red team, the blue team goes crazy, and if you say anything nice about the blue team, the red team goes crazy, right? They knew it was coming, so they included her on the list. They knew it was going to create some animosity from a certain faction of people, and they did it anyway. And I think that actually shows a lot of ethics. That shows that they were cognizant of what was about to be published, and they anticipated what the reaction would be, and they did it anyway. And they didn't let fear of what might come, or the wrath of whatever group of people was going to come after them with pitchforks as a result of doing it. They didn't let that dissuade them from publishing the list they wanted to publish. And to me, that speaks volumes.
By the way, Cameron Craig just commented on the thread here, and he said that the majority of PR Week paid subscribers are probably agencies. So I wonder if that also plays into it. I'm not a subscriber. They've published me a couple of times, but um, despite Blair, my belief in traditional media, I don't read a lot of it. And so um, and so if they are, I mean, maybe to your point, Jeremy, like they're not at risk as much because agencies know they rely on it for certain things. And so while the people may be yelling, they're not really the core audience from a profit and a revenue perspective.
I want to say this. We talked a little bit about, it's not the list of the best people and it's not the list of the most admired. It's the power list, right? There's an objective. Now, there's certainly a cutoff, and there has to be some evaluation of who we're considering, but it's still it's a more objective list, right? When Rolling Stone publishes a list of the 50 greatest guitarists, I mean, that I think we all want to like print it out, crumple it up, and throw it in a pile and burn it because it's so stupid. A lot of the things that either are included or aren't included, but I think that's a subjective list based on opinion, and the power list I think is a lot more objective.
So Scott, though, I'm gonna I think throw something a little bit on Blair's side of this here because in reading from um, the what they said the list was about, quote, the list, this is from PR Week. The list reflects power, influence, excellence, effectiveness, and the ability of the PR pros named to it to provide senior counsel to their CEOs and C-suite leaders or their clients in the case of PR agency folks. Now, the word excellence is usually used in quality of public relation or any industry, but ability to execute the job. But here they say to provide senior counsel to their CEOs. I've not followed Karoline Leavitt's career extensively. Blair, you noted that she's very young. I know she ran for Congress and lost in a couple of election cycles ago. Is PR Week going against that by saying, providing someone who probably isn't providing, quote, senior counsel, end quote, to the President of the United States? Now, I don't know what she does. I don't know any press secretaries at all outside of their reputations. But I do wonder, to Blair's point of her youth and her relative inexperience, and to your point, Jeremy, that Jake Harney had a substantial career in senior roles before becoming press secretary. Does this create a little bit of a potential subjectivity or violation of that part of the definition?
Well, I mean, my short answer to that is I don't think it does. And again, it's kind of a twilight zone here that I find myself kind of sort of defending her and the Trump administration. But I mean, so many of these roles, yes, like she is quite young, but she worked in the Office of Presidential Correspondence. She was an assistant to Kayleigh McEnany in the first Trump administration. She ran for Congress. She has been in Trump's world. And the bottom line is, with a lot of things Trump, and candidly, a lot of things sort of politics, is that do you have the trust of your boss, right? I
Right.
mean, if your boss believes that you are representing him or her in the way that they want, in a way that's effective, and your boss happens to be the leader of the free world, I mean, that's sort of the qualification. It may be a different qualification than, a lot of us are used to. I mean, we've, seen people who came up the ranks in an individual politician's universe. I mean, you have Karl Rove. I mean, he was a political consultant down in Texas. But, he started working with George W. Bush. David Axelrod, same thing. I mean, he wrote a column in Chicago, but then he was giving informal advice to Obama and became, one of the most powerful people at the White House, right? So I think, listen, I know this may be super unpopular. I definitely, I find Karoline Leavitt certainly be fulfilling the wishes of her boss and being a effective mouthpiece for his administration. Again, I don't like the tactics. I certainly, don't like the, to put it very diplomatically, the obfuscation of facts or the truth. But I think when it comes to sort of qualifications, a lot of this in these, appointed positions in politics are whatever the boss thinks they are. And if they, think you're effective, it's obvious as a junior staffer prior to this role that she gained the attention of the boss and others, who were in these positions. And so I think, I'm less, concerned about that. I mean, than I am, for example, someone like Pete Hegseth, who, was an infantry soldier, and we appreciate that service, but, running an organization of 1 million people as the defense secretary seemed to me to be, beyond, the realm of normal, right? But again, he had sufficient votes in the Senate, and Donald Trump liked him. He liked what he said on Fox News. So I think, I've seen a lot of people.
High standards in this administration, as we've discovered.
Yeah, but that's the standard, right? Does the boss think you represent him well? And she certainly is highly qualified if that is a standard. That's what I would say about that. But in Washington, you see this a lot. I mean, you see a lot of people in very, very senior roles, oftentimes because of the trust their boss has in them. Some of them are people in their early to mid 20s, and others are much older. I think that really, we see that particularly in Washington, but outside of it too. And obviously it can frustrate a lot of us who, have put in the work over decades, but sort of it is what it is,
So Blair, one of the things that you've again dived in on is ethics. And so let's wrap up here by talking about what does it look like to be an ethical PR practitioner? Again, I'll start off with, is it the organization you work for, or is it how you practice the art of public relations and the science of public relations? Does it matter if someone does things you don't like, or does it matter that they're lying on the job? So Blair, you've said tax on the Constitution, the foundation of our country. Where's the line? Where's the line where someone should not be considered by the sort of standard bearers of the industry for anything?
To me, it's the Constitution. That's what's written. That is what, that's the code that we go by. And so if we're looking at ethics, we go by certain codes, right? And so for the United States, that is the Constitution. For PR Week, it is whatever it is for them. For PRSA, it's whatever it is for them. So to me, though, when you look at what makes that up, it's everything. It's you eat, sleep, breathe those ethics. That becomes people within an organization get nominated for interorganizational awards by how they, might line up against that org's mission, vision, values, right? And it's everything that they do. It's how they show up every day. It's the way that they do their job. It's the way that they dress. It's, and as a comms professional, I often let people know that you are a representation of the company on and off the job. If you get screaming drunk after hours and you do something really offensive or crazy, come the next morning, you might find yourself without a job, right? So
speaking of that standard, who was the woman who was fired by the administration?
Yeah.
By GSA? Was it, Blair? She was doing her fashion show from the office after hours. And while everyone else was getting fired, she was joking about certain things. And then the next day she was out of a job.
Yeah. So it is, I think it's everything. It's not just the organization, it's how you represent the organization, because you are a representative of that organization on and off the clock, whether you like it or not. And I tell people that within the org all the time. Same thing with what you post on LinkedIn, Instagram. I learned that the hard way in my career, where, I was posting stuff about dating and love and all this stuff. And come Monday morning, somebody didn't like something about it, and I was no longer running PR and media because they, but what
Well,
that's
shame on them, because I'm sure it was entertaining and really helpful to some people.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
probably true.
but it is, it's a lesson to learn, and that lesson is on and off the job, you are a representative of that organization. On and off the job, she represents the Trump administration. The Trump administration is supposed to represent the Constitution of the United States, period. And so that's where, when you ask, again, to me, when you talk about ethics, it's the document, whether that's the Constitution or an organizational document or otherwise.
I think if they put together the top 50 most ethical communications people, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who works in politics make that list,
Yeah.
right?
Agree,
It
as
does.
someone who started my career in politics.
Same. Yep.
It doesn't matter which side of the aisle, whether you are far extreme left or extreme right or somewhere in the middle. I don't think that there are very many people who work in political communications who could really make a case for being included on an ethical list.
Because I would say the inputs drive the outputs, and what is valued oftentimes in the political sphere is, it's not like it's necessarily someone's like, when you get into politics, oh, like if you're not dishonest, you're not gonna, make it here. But you're trying to win, a 24-hour news cycle. You have typically detractors. You have, other institutions that are trying to undermine what you're trying to do. It's a very combative field and sort of a kill or be kill kind of style. I mean, not hopefully physically, but sort of the news, right? And winning, elections and winning news cycles. And, you have competitors that, billions of dollars are on the line with a certain piece of legislation, right? And so I think the inputs are to win at most costs, and sometimes at all costs, right? And even something like that should be as universal as the Constitution, as we've seen, is up for interpretation, right? What, one appellate court may think of something, the US Supreme Court in its current composition may think something else, right? And I think the combativeness of politics makes it very hard to sort of step away from your sort of human frame. And I think, to your point, Blair, that's unfortunate, right? But it kind of doesn't sort of change the reality. Although I do think there are, for people that try to be honest brokers, to people who try to treat other people with respect, even if they don't agree with their points of view, people who do what they say they're going to do, right? Again, even if you don't like it. Like, I think, for example, like, for as much derision and heat and mocking as like Anthony Scaramucci got, I think of he was someone that, to his detriment, in the whatever it was 9 or 10 days that he was in the
Right.
position, like someone would ask sometimes a tough question, he'd be like, I can see why that would be, an area of conflict. I can see why you would be upset at that right? Like, I do think people, and I think why Scaramucci's, doing very well for himself still and holding these conferences is like, I do think the people who treat other people with respect and are honest, more often than not, long term, are going to be sort of seen as people you might want to do business with, right? Even if you didn't agree with their politics. And one final thing, I do think, though, the reason why so many former White House press secretaries ascend to very high corporate jobs is exactly because of that experience in the Thunderdome, so to speak. This intense sort of nonstop 24-hour, crisis management, the complex people that are involved, right? Like, they know that you've been in battle and that you know how to handle things, hot potatoes, you know how to handle yourself under pressure, you understand how to make quick decisions, and you understand how to protect high-powered principals above you. And I think, again, those skills for companies like we see here that have a lot of public scrutiny, they have a lot of liability when it comes to potential legislation and regulation, and enforcement. I think that's why you see that. Sometimes it's because they're also seen as ethical, you know, forgive the play on word, earnest players, if it's Josh Earnest. But other times it's just that, you know, that they understand how to handle, you know, tough spots, right? So I would say that. But I also agree with Blair that there is sort of a general continuum, and we have seen in recent years that, you know, even sort of at the edges of that, you know, we've seen that get stepped over. We've seen that, you know, from different politicians, you know, on both sides of the aisle. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, people like I would consider Ilhan Omar, right? And Cori Bush, right? People like Thomas Massey, people that, you know, 20 years ago would probably not be able to be elected to Congress at all because of their relatively extreme positions, are now sort of there. And I think that also speaks to the tribalization of our politics, and in some cases, what, you know, was once considered extreme becoming more mainstream.
Well, in the abandonment of, to our, one of the sub themes here, the abandonment of ethics for that partisanship, right? Because I forget his name. He was one of George W. Bush's press secretaries when he died of cancer.
Oh, Tony Snow.
Tony Snow, thank you. You know, there were people on both sides of the aisle saying he was a great human being. And I think too, that's where in college, I'll give away my politics for those who haven't figured it out yet. In college,
Wait,
I
you're
went to
not a Democrat?
Yeah, right. I'm actually not a Republican either. But in college, I was a conservative. I wrote a column for the school paper, and I had friends of all types, partly because as long as you'll say hello, I'll talk back and probably not let you get another word in edgewise. And so what one person told me was a defining characteristic that he appreciated, at least, was that I'm well intentioned. It didn't matter so much that we had moral or political disagreements. It was, you're a decent human being, Dusty, even if I don't understand or agree with your positions. And I think one of the posts I'm going to have later this week is going to talk about one thing that Blair, I think I really enjoy with you and with Jeremy especially, is I think, Jeremy, the first 15 or 20 times we engaged on LinkedIn, we didn't even agree, and it became a running joke between us. And Blair, this is what our third time being on camera together, and each time it's been a debate, you know. Yeah. And obviously there's a fine line there, right? You can't, you know, where's the line for every individual is different. Just like with clients, you know, we're a non-political company. We take most everyone who comes to the door. We won't take everybody, and I'm sure that would be true for, you know, any firm, whether it's ethics on finances, whether it's ethics of how you treat people, or whether it's political or cultural ethical values. And so I do think it's really important that, you know, again, we're having this conversation because there's a wide range of politics represented here, wide range of views on this particular subject being represented here. And I think it's a good reminder that the whole, you know, we can't get along anymore, it doesn't exist in the real world. If you get past the comment section, it has low barrier to entry and a lot of it, and I can never pronounce this word, anonymity to it. I know I just botched that word. Because people can be relatively anonymous or at least distant from. There are very few consequences for calling someone a jerk online.
Yeah, and everyone has to be comfortable. Like, it's a very individual decision too. I mean, and I think like everyone has to decide when it comes to clients, you know, or friends or intimate partners, like just the types of sort of behaviors and causes that they want to be associated with. And, you know, there's a handful of causes that I would most likely direct if on the off chance a client came to me, you know, for help. I would not be likely to represent, a gun manufacturer. I don't begrudge people who do. I would not likely, or I would never, be, for example, I would not be working for any of these organizations that were disrupting, campus and impeding Jewish students' ability to go to school, under the sort of auspices of Free Gaza, right? Again, I don't begrudge people who get involved in those causes, but everyone, has to be comfortable doing what they want. I do think, as kind of a coda here, I do think that one thing that's bothered me in recent years, both from the left and the right, is this sort of like cancel culture, or others call it deplatforming, right? And I think, there may be like extreme sort of cases that are so egregious where an individual, is saying like they deny the Holocaust, for example, or they like defend slavery, right? Okay. But, you have all types of people that have been sort of canceled or attempted to be canceled based on, a political viewpoint, right? And I think that too much of that happens on the left. Bill Maher, who's kind of a hero of mine, has been talking a lot about this. And how do we try to bridge the gap in a historically sort of contentious zeitgeist?
So Blair, I'd like you to kind of let's do a round robin close here. But Blair, I'd like you to kind of respond a little bit to what Jeremy said, but also just recapitulate for everyone where you stand on this, because
Yeah.
I think you've articulated it really well. And what I most appreciate, as I've said before, is you're not on here. I don't think you're mad at anybody for disagreeing with you.
Oh.
I think, and I think that's what I want to make sure that, gets across to people as well here is having a disagreement is okay.
Interestingly, I mean, as thank you to Scott, because the way that both Scott and Jeremy put it, this is a power list, and it's power list that's happening right now. And so, inevitably, she is arguably somebody who holds an amount of power. I would argue that the power is innate within the role, but she holds that role. And so, Dustin, maybe as in typical form, I find myself at the end of the conversation flipping and going, okay, well, yeah, I guess, she does belong on the list. And like literally every debate that Dustin and I have had, by the end of it, I've flipped. So
And so have I
like
too.
You gotta
very
flip him, man.
easily
You gotta flip him.
persuaded. But I agree with that. I think that makes a perfect amount of sense, right? This is a power list. It's not a likable list. It's not an ethics list. And the publisher of PR Week said that. And so when you boil it down to just that, my original standpoint was, one, she doesn't hold the power, the position does. But two, that, this is a different day and age. This is a different year. And so, there is an opportunity to sort of say, look, because this is such a different time and we're now in such a different place, we are making a different decision to maybe not include her on the list. But that didn't happen. And whether or not I like it, she's on the list. So, it is what it is.
Go ahead.
And we came out of this all friends. That's the most important point.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it was about having a respectful discussion, right? And look, I don't think any less of anybody because they feel one way or the other. I mean, that would go against my ethics, right? So everybody's entitled to feel the way they feel based on their life experience, and we've all come to this conversation in a respectful way. Nobody's shouting or yelling fascist or social, whatever. So,
Right.
but Dustin, I do want to point out, I'm really impressed that while you couldn't say anonymized, you just breezed right past recapitulate. You just,
Amazing.
Well,
you just mastered it.
I have to blame our copy editor. He uses that word on probably 1/3 of the op-eds that he's editing. He says, make sure we recapitulate the beginning of the piece and then
Well, go ahead and practice anonymized, but I think you really got recapitulate locked.
thank you. I appreciate
So,
it.
Yeah, no, I think just to round things out, you know, I think it's clear that, PR Week made a decision and, for better or for worse, it's the right decision based on the role. And sure, the power comes from the role, not the person, but that's kind of mostly true with anybody who has a particular position, right? Um, CEO is on top of the world, gets fired, never gets another CEO job. Well, they don't really have much power anymore and they can't really command a room anymore because nobody really wants to talk to them because they don't have the power. So, it's not always the case. There's personal power and there's positional power. We can have a whole nother discussion about that. But, in many cases, the business card defines what the power is. And she's got the business card right now.
I'd love that discussion, by the way, Scott. I think that would be a really interesting discussion.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, for those who are thinking that PR Week is bending the knee, again, agree or disagree with the decision to include Karoline Leavitt. She's 17th on the list. I don't think President Trump is impressed by anything that would have that second digit attached to it.
Totally.
I don't think President Trump cares about, reads, or even knows that PR Week
Sure,
exists.
but a lot of the people in Blair's post said this is bending the knee, trying to protect themselves. It's also notable that they launched Pride in PR this year, fifth anniversary of it, in a year when a lot of Pride stuff wasn't happening. So I just want to point out that if you are left of center and you believe you oppose the Trump administration, PR Week is probably still your friend. They just disagree with you on this particular decision. Jeremy, you said you have to jump, so let's wrap up with what you have to say, and then I gotta get to dinner myself. So
In a rare move, I think everyone has said some great things. I can't think of anything else other than this was a really interesting discussion. I definitely am going to be tuning in, even though it'll be between us and whoever's still listening on here. Probably my first or second time only listening to the PR Week podcast. I'm definitely going to try and log into that. And if it basically is the same exact stuff that all of us were saying, I think we did a good job.
Yeah.
Agreed.
yeah, fair enough.
I was really hopeful that one of Jeremy or Scott would go, well, now that Blair has flipped, I've flipped. So
that'll be the next discussion, Blair.
Hey,
Yeah.
look, if we have a unanimous conclusion here, I think that means we're all probably right.
Yeah.
I like being right. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Doesn't-
See you guys.
Folks, thanks a
Be well,
lot.
everybody.
Take care.